إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين من تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد عباد الله فإن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدي هدي نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة. I bear witness that there is no true deity worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That his Prophet Mohamed sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is his final and last messenger. O Allah, we seek refuge in you from our evil deeds and from the consequences of our actions. O you who believe, do not die except in a state of Islam, in a state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do not die except in a state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say the truth and say what is correct. If you do so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would rectify and correct your actions. And whomever obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, then he has already attained the ultimate success. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, the best of guidance is the guidance of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the worst of matters are newly innovated matters in this religion. Because whatever is innovated in this religion will lead you astray. And whatever will lead you astray will lead you to hellfire. Before we start, inshallah, can I ask the brothers to fill in the spaces, especially the young brothers at the corners. Can I ask you to move forward so you can free the space for others to come in? The ones who are the young leaning towards the wall, filling the gaps, the spaces. Jazakumullah khair. And try to keep the door free for others to come in who are coming late. That's on both sides. So the left over there and the right. I still don't see the brothers moving. Try to free the door as much as you can. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, nobody can deny that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His wisdom and knowledge, has created us with certain desires that we have. And certain things that we are inclined towards. However, also in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His knowledge, He did not tell us to completely not indulge in them, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed rules and regulations and boundaries by which we are able to indulge in these desires in the proper ways. But the question always is, and there's two questions that kind of pose themselves. Will we ever be able to overcome our desires? And the second is, if so, what are the means for us that we can take to overcome these desires? And to answer this question, I'd like to share with you two stories. One from the modern time, in the 60s to be honest, it's more of an experiment. And the other one is a beautiful story from the Quran. But both, interestingly, have to do with a group of age, of individuals. We often feel that they are unable to control themselves from indulging in their desires. The first actually has to do with the age group between 4 and 8 years old. Now this was an experiment done in Stanford University. And the funny thing is they call it the marshmallow experiment. The basis of this is to test the ability of that age group to control their desires and to not indulge in them. And the basic premises of them is that you place something desirable to that child in front of them, whether it is a candy or a marshmallow or whatever it is, and you leave it in front of them. Now, prior to that, they establish a relationship with the child, a relationship of trust, where the child feels comfortable that whenever the person will tell them something, they will do it. And so you're establishing a belief of trust with the child over here. And then they leave this thing in front of them, whether it's a marshmallow or candy, and you tell that child you have one or two options. You can eat it now and indulge in it, or refrain, wait for a little bit, about 15 minutes, and I will give you a second one. And so the experiment is done by the individual, leaves, and they leave the child. Of course, all this is videotaped, and you see the interesting reactions of the children. Some of the children immediately indulged in the candy or in the chocolate, or whatever is in front of them. But others exhibited self-control, desiring to have two instead of one. And the way they coped with it was different from child to child. Some would close their eyes. Others would tug at their shirts, or their girls would tug on their hair. Some would start biting their nails. Others would start shaking the table. Some would caress the marshmallow. Others would start smelling it. But in the end, many of them were able to control themselves. And when the instructor came back in, whomever indulged in it was left. But whoever was able to control themselves got a greater reward. What's interesting is that those individuals, same individuals in the research, were followed in their life 15 to 20 years later. And they found an interesting statistics is that those children who exhibited self-control, controlled their desires, were vastly more successful in their life, in their studies. Their SAT scores were about 5 to 10 times higher. They were able to focus more on their studies and their jobs. They overall had a better life than those who did not control their desires. That is one story on the side. The second one actually has to do from the Quran. And it's about Yusuf alayhi salam at the age of youth. Now this is the storyline after he was taken up by the Aziz of Egypt. And he was taken to be nurtured and grow in the palace of Al-Aziz. And Yusuf alayhi salam had grown and become a young, strong man who was very handsome. Now I want you to think of Yusuf and maybe perhaps put yourself in that situation just to be able to see what's going on. A person who is young, who is handsome, who is a slave, who has no family or ties, who is in a place that really nobody knows, and so has nothing to lose. And Yusuf alayhi salam was tested at that age and inflicted by a trial that the wife of the Aziz, who was a very beautiful woman with power, who desired Yusuf alayhi salam, and so she pursued him. So Yusuf is not the person who's pursuing, but he's being pursued, which makes things a lot easier. Furthermore, Yusuf alayhi salam was cornered by the wife of Al-Aziz. He was enticed. He was put in a place where nobody can see him, where things are locked and so it is safe. And he was cornered and so he was pressured. But even yet, was also threatened. If he does not indulge in those desires, then he would be punished. So all these are very strong factors that would compel many and give them excuses to indulge in their desires. But Yusuf alayhi salam, in that youth and age, in that surge of desires, He resisted, alayhi salam. And so the short answer to the first question is yes, we are able to control our desires. No matter what age group we're in. Whether it is as children and toddlers, or children I should say, or teenagers, or even young men and women. And even more as adults and the older age, we should have more control over our own desires. But the question is, going back to these two stories, how did these groups, two groups, how were they able to control their desires? This is something important that we have to answer, because it really will help us to correct our means and our ways of life, and not to fall and succumb to our own desires. It would help us conform with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made obligatory upon us, and to refrain from what He subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited. Now I'm mostly going to focus on Yusuf alayhi salam's story because it's closer to us, because he is a believer. Alayhi salam. How did Yusuf alayhi salam, and in fact also the children, by the way, there's a correlation, were they overcome this? I'm going to mention 4 things inshallah that would help us. The first and foremost is to realize that the one thing, or one of the things that helped Yusuf alayhi salam overcome these desires is the strength of his iman. Any sin that we fall into, and any time we succumb to our desires, is deeply rooted in either the low level of iman, or perhaps even the absence of iman. For example, why would an individual who does not believe in Allah, who does not believe that he will be put accountable on the Day of Judgment, who does not believe that there is a higher being that tells him what is right and wrong, who does not believe that there's a Day of Judgment where there is a punishment and then there is pleasure, what would prevent that individual from fulfilling every desire? The reality is nothing, and we see this vividly in front of us every single day in the world we live in. This is why, to be honest, in reality, atheism is very dangerous. Because there's nothing to hold an individual back. No true moral code. Because in the end, these moral codes that the atheists produce will continually change over time. There's no reason for them not to indulge in these desires. And so we end up in what we see, the chaos that we see in our modern society. Of all we care about is indulging in these desires, no matter their consequences. And there are consequences in indulging in those desires. The example of the children, for example, those who indulged hastily in the pleasure, it affected them on the long term, is that they always favored the immediate pleasure, to get the easy way. And so it resulted in them being not the most successful individuals. Sometimes you don't see that now, but we see it later on. So Yusuf alayhi salam, what prevented him from falling is the strength of his iman. Knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching him. Al-Basir. That attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He sees all. That even though the doors are closed, and he is by himself, that still Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching him. Knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim, As-Sami', the one who is knowledgeable, the one who is all-hearing, he knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with him in his knowledge, but also hears what he says. The strength of Iman to know that he is accountable for what he does, either in reward or punishment, with reward or punishment, creates an incentive. And so an individual who has that level of Iman would not succumb easily to desire. This is why the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari, as narrated by Abu Hurairah, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يزني الزاني حين يزني وهو مؤمن ولا يشرب الخمر حين يشربها وهو مؤمن ولا يسرق السارق حين يسرق وهو مؤمن. The Prophet ﷺ said that the person does not fornicate, or the fornicator does not fornicate when he indulges in that action while he is a believer. The person who drinks alcohol does not drink it while he is a believer. The one who steals does not steal while he is in a state where he is a believer. Meaning that he is completely conscious and aware. His strength of his belief is so high that he understands and realizes and is conscious that Allah is with him, that he can see him subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he subhanahu wa ta'ala can hear him. If you have that conscience that Allah is with me, Allah is present, it will prevent us from indulging and falling into these desires. Yusuf alayhi salam, in the verse of the Quran, clearly shows that he had this. When he said, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ, that verily those who transgress will never succeed. He's talking to Imra'at al-Aziz, the wife of Aziz, when she was trying to entice him, and he told her, no, this is a transgression, and the transgressors will never succeed. He's completely, fully aware. It's important to realize that for us to overcome our desires, we need a stronger incentive than that desire. And Iman, having a strong belief, and so we need to increase that Iman, provides this incentive. Because if it's weak, this incentive is weak, guess what we're going to indulge in? In the case of the children, they truly believed that those individuals who promised them the extra marshmallow or candy would give it to them. That's a greater incentive. And so they refrained. For us as believers, we believe that there is an incentive, a greater incentive, and that is Jannah. The pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and gaining His rewards. But in fact, this reward also can be immediate in this world. As the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in hadith as narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يترك العبد شيئا لله لا يتركه إلا له إلا عوضه الله منه ما كان خيرا له في دينه ودنياه. The Prophet ﷺ said that the slave does not leave anything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he leaves it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except that Allah would reward him from it something that is better in his faith and religion and in this dunya. So if we truly believe in that, that is a very strong incentive that we need to establish that will help us overcome these desires. And so it's important for us to work on the level of Iman that we have and try to increase it. That is one. Two, the second thing we need to do is not to make excuses. Think about Yusuf alayhi salam. He was put in a position where he had the majority or a whole lot of excuses that could have been used, or an individual could have used, to justify indulging in those desires. Being threatened, being cornered, being a slave, a more powerful individual above them. So many things, not having any consequences because he has no family or ties in that place. So many excuses. A person once said, the funny thing about excuses is that they are always valid. Meaning that we use them for a reason. It's to validate our actions. And so it's important that we do not come up with excuses to validate why we fell into these desires. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِيرًا. Verily the human, بَالْإِنسان, the human, عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا, he is a witness upon himself. even if he puts forth excuses. Because in the end, what is right, and what is wrong is wrong. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not leave it for us to decide this, but He told us what is wrong. And He told us and pointed us to what is right. And so it's important for us not to make these excuses. It really is. Because it will help us strengthen our iman. It will help us try to do things in a better way. A third thing that we need to do, perhaps, is to acknowledge our own weakness. It is really important. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, that verily human was created weak, it will tell you that we need help to overcome our desires. We don't have the strength to overcome our desires. And so we need a source we can get our strength from. And this source has to be Allah. Which means that we also have to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen us. This is why we tend to say, and the Prophet taught us to say, and it's a form of dhikr, لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. La hawla, which means that there is no changing of your state. There's no transition from one state to another. Or the strength to do it, except by Allah. Yusuf alayhi salam, he acknowledged this weakness. And he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, إِلَّا تَصْرِفْ عَنِّي كَيْدَهُنْ أَصْبُوا إِلَيْهِنْ وَأَكُمْ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. O Allah, if you do not keep away from me their treachery and deception, referring to the pressure that was being placed on Yusuf alayhi salam to fall and succumb into desires and commit a sin. He said, if you do not keep their treachery and deception away from me, أَصْبُ إِلَيْهِنْ, I might indulge in it and lean towards it, and then become from those who are ignorant. Yusuf alayhi salam acknowledged his human side, and he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help him. But there's also something important when we acknowledge our weakness, is that we need to remove away the fallacy that we sometimes use and convince ourselves that we are in control. That we will indulge in these desires once and then refrain. Or twice, and then we are able to control ourselves and stop it. Because the reality, this is not true. And this is one of the doors of shaitan. What really happens is once you indulge in those desires, it will become very difficult to leave it behind. It will become a constant weakness that will come back to us. And so it's important that we acknowledge that we have this weakness so that we are careful and protect ourselves from it and leave a distance between us and falling into it so that we will keep safe. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from it. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength to overcome it. That is the third thing we can do. Now the fourth thing that we can do when we are facing those desires that would prevent us not to fall into them is that we remove ourselves from those situations. If we ever find ourselves either in the situation that will make us fall into these desires, we need to remove ourselves from it. But also, we need to know what will cause us to fall into these sins and keep ourselves away from it. This is, for example, what Yusuf alayhi salam did. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, فَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ, when the wife of an Aziz had closed the door and tried to entice Yusuf alayhi salam, Yusuf alayhi salam realized what's happening and immediately ran for the door. he tried to remove himself from that situation. So similarly, for us not to fall into those desires, we need to remove ourselves from that situation as fast as we can. But also from the Sunnah, we know that we sometimes are controlled by the situation, or I should say that we are affected by the environment and the situation we are in. This is why when the Prophet ﷺ told us about the individual who killed 100 individuals, the advice that the scholar gave him is that he needs to remove from this city. Go away. This environment is not good for you. You are unable to fight the desires you are placed in them. Those people are not helping you. You need to move to another town where there are pious people you can worship Allah with. So sometimes we need to change our environment. And perhaps this is why that the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims had to move to Medina to enable the Muslims to grow even more and for the message of Islam to spread. Because the environment in Mecca was not conducive, was not beneficial. So there had to be another environment established. And Allah decided it would be Medina. Sometimes we need to change our friends or leave them behind. Whatever the case is, we need to remove ourselves from what makes us fall into those desires. Now, by the way, the children that I talked about did have those 4 things. It's kind of interesting, even those are children. I'm just telling you because sometimes it's built into us. And I'm saying this is because we need to strengthen ourselves and our next generation through these methodologies to give them the ability to control themselves. So we need to build a more wholesome iman and strengthen the iman in ourselves and our future generation. Because this is the anchor that will keep us away from those desires. Will give us the ability to control. So it was the belief, for example, of the children that there is, and it will happen, that there is a greater reward. They did not make excuses for eating that chocolate. In one of the clips, they had siblings sitting there. And they would talk to each other. One of them would try to take nibble bites from it. And the other one would tell them, "What are you doing? Don't eat it." And the person says, "It looks good. It tastes good." And so the other one is telling them not to make excuses, because if they eat it, they're not going to get the greater reward. There goes the excuses. The children that try to remove themselves away from the situation, the way they did it is, I mentioned some of them closed their eyes. Actually, some of them turned their back to that marshmallow or chocolate. They try to distance themselves from that situation so that they won't indulge in that desire. These are kids and children. So it tells us that we are able to nurture these in them. We really have to work on this. Because we are, as a society, as Muslims, we are suffering from overindulging in desires. And whatever the reason is that we try to come up with, we have a greater strength that we have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to overcome these desires, to protect ourselves and become better Muslims, to become the nation and people that are worthy of Allah's mercy. The ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who had brought forth to rescue the rest of humanity. And so we really need to do this for our sake and for the sake of humanity. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لكم ولكم. إن الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين من تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to ponder upon some of the things that we read in the Quran and those stories. Because really there are treasures that we need to learn from. And some of the simplest stories that we read in the Quran, such as for example, the Surah of Yusuf alayhi salam, there are many lessons we can take from it. And we need to sometimes contemplate and think about those. And to make ourselves accountable for whatever we do in this world. And try to strengthen our belief in Iman, so that we are able to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength to learn what benefits us and benefit from what we learn, and to stay steadfast on the straight path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us taqwa, to protect ourselves from His wrath and anger by fulfilling our obligations and refraining from His prohibitions. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون استغفروا الله يغفر لكم اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات ارحمنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصاحب الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم نسألك الفردوس الأعلى وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل ونعوذ بك من النار وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل اللهم نسألك الفردوس الأعلى وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل ونعوذ بك من النار وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل اللهم ارزقنا حسن الخاتمة اللهم ارزقنا حسن الخاتمة واجعل خير أعمالنا خواتيمها اللهم انصر المؤمنين والمؤمنات اللهم انصر المؤمنين والمستضعفين في كل مكان اللهم أيدهم بنصر من عندك اللهم ثبت أقدامهم وانصرهم على أعدائك وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وقوموا إلى صلاتكم.